the changes to stage 3 tax cuts are still being distilled amongst politicians, and opposition weighing up exactly what they'll do. Let's bring in my Sky News colleague, former Labor Minister Graham Richardson. Thanks for your time as ever, Richo. Look, interesting to hear Peter Dutton talk about Julia Gillard today, obviously alluding to the carbon tax, and I know Labor sort of went, maybe we shouldn't have conceded that was a broken promise. This clearly is, but the trickier part is the carbon tax left voters, for the most part, worse off. This leaves voters, 84% of them, better off. That's what Labor's banking on. Will that trump the broken promise for voters?
I think it usually does. Money in the pocket usually wins the battle. So I'd say that the odds are in favour of Albo in this one. And it's not something he ought to try too often, but he and Chalmers have done enough, I think, to be able to get away with it.
We'll see what voters make of that. There can be a transaction cost, but on this particular policy, next is what the coalition will do. Clearly, they have to have, I think, a different policy to Labor. Otherwise, they're backing in a broken promise. But what do? Do they promise something for the top end or higher income earners later on? Can they afford to strip back any of the lower and middle income tax breaks that are being handed down?
No.
What do you think their strategy should be?
They can't possibly do the last thing you mentioned, try and strip back anything from low-paid workers. That'd be a disaster for them. I think they've been wedged very neatly on this. It's very hard to see where they go because no matter which way they go, they get criticised. This has been pretty clever from the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. They've shown their political skills here. We'll see how it works out economically, but politically, I think they're showing their way on top.
It makes Dunkley fascinating because the broken promise will be still red hot at Dunkley. Maybe that bit's eased off by the next election. We'll see. But at the same time, on the other side of the coin, disproportionately, this policy helps Dunkley voters. I think 87% of them are better off. What's the pass mark for Labor on this? What sort of swing will they start to be troubled by, do you think, in Dunkley, given all the different things going on?
Oh, look, I think, in my view, by-election swingers are tending to get a little larger. I think anything over, say, 7 would be concerning. Anything up to there, I think you can live with, you can write off, you can explain away. But once it starts to get to the really high numbers, 8, 9, 10, then I think your explanation is going to look pretty limp.
Yeah, well, if you get that high, there'll be all sorts of permutations. Remembering there's a margin a bit over 6, so that's the point at which it changes hand, but it doesn't change minority or majority government, of course. So from here, the other thing for Labor is how do they counter the trust issue? Because Jim Chalmers was getting asked today, well, what about negative gearing? You said there was no change there. He had a new word, we're not contemplating. Is that going to cut it?
I think it'll just get there. It does some damage along the way. You always do damage if you break a promise, but I think the way they've handled it means that they'll get away with it. With minimal damage, but you always suffer some damage. You can't do these things and suffer none. It's just not possible.
Yeah, all right, so they're banking on that, perhaps dissipating some of that anger. We will see. Dunkley will be fascinating. Richo, we'll talk later on this week. Thank you.
We shall.